can still remember in those first 6 months before I became charge physio that there were some very, very severely handicapped patients with arthritis who'd been in QE for months. And I remember one particular man who had very severe psoriatic arthritis, and he'd been in bed for I don't know how many months, no idea, but a long, long time. He was very tall, had a beard, and he was very, very handicapped. And the idea was that while we had sufficient staff, we were going to try and mobilise him. And we got him sitting on the side of the bed, and we'd done this and we'd done that, and the day came when Patricia decided that this was the day that we were going to stand him. We did. We stood him. Actually, fear and trembling, we actually stood him. And that was okay. We put him back to bed, lifted him bodily back to bed, went to do the same thing again the next day, and we accomplished it. We sat on the side, and when his head had cleared, we stood him up, and there was an ominous crack. But he stood there, he didn't say a word, he just stood. And we tried doing sort of weight transference and balancing, just literally taking weight from one side to the other. And we put him back to bed. And my nerves failed me, and I went and saw Dr. Isdale, whose patient he was. And he sort of looked at me and said, "What have you done?" And I said, "Well, I don't know which bit I've fractured, but I've obviously fractured something." And sure enough, we had fractured his neck of femur. It had just gone. It was just osteoporotic, and it had just gone. And we never ever tried to mobilise him ever again. We just couldn't. They couldn't do anything with it, and in those days there was nothing that you could do. So he spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair until he was eventually put into a hospital rest home somewhere. I don't know where, but it wasn't in Rotorua. But a very sobering lesson as to what we should do and what we shouldn't do, and how we can do it. And in those days, patients who were really, really sore and really painful, it seemed as though the acute flare for their arthritis was bed rest as to how to deal with it. In those days, it had always been planned that the physio department and the hydrotherapy department at Queen Elizabeth Hospital would be united as one place. When I first arrived there, all the hydrotherapy, the Rachel baths, the massage, the mud pools were over in what is now the museum, over at the bathhouse. And we spent hours. We didn't do heat treatments, we didn't do heat, we didn't do shortwave. And people would tell you that there was only exercise done by physio. But in actual fact, all the palliative treatments were done over at the bathhouse, and patients were transported in a little van over to the bathhouse, where they had mud baths, Rachel baths, and aches massage, and even electric baths to stimulate them. So these treatments were actually planned and put into their daily program, and you had to allow a sufficient length of time for patients to have that treatment. So the only treatment that we gave was in the more active physio type exercise, mostly with Guthrie Smith sling exercises and big progression of weightlifting and strengthening up of muscles. We were doing plenty of palliative treatment, but as I said, we weren't doing it under our supervision. It was done by appointment over at the back. Patients that couldn't get over and couldn't get into the van because it couldn't take wheelchairs, then obviously we had to use heat lamps, and we used a lot of hot packs to give them that same pain relief.